Hello and welcome to One Last Night. This is a new visual novel. Well, new-ish. I think there's like 3 updates already, but it's new to me. um, and it did recently come out, and I did see it on and off on my Twitter feed, so I was like, well, let's give it a try. And I also asked Jaden about it, and since apparently he played it already a little, and he said that it was good. So yeah. Anywho, so I know very little about it. Um, I know it starts off nice, but then something is going to happen. So I'm assuming that's gonna be a not good thing. So just be warned. But that's really all I know. I think the one of the characters' name is Marshall, but I don't remember what the other one's name is. So yeah. Anywho, well, let's begin and see what this story is about. I'm gonna pick the default name. There's a sudden coldness at my back, causing me to stir from my sleep. I move my arm around behind me, patting the empty area of the bed. With a groan, I call out into the dark room. Is it morning already? My question is met with a light chuckle in response. Unfortunately so, Dorian. Reluctantly, I roll over to look at my boyfriend, Marshall. He's in the middle of fastening his pants, not yet fully clothed. I drink in the sight of his half-naked lupine form, stray rays of sunlight peeking in through the curtains and causing his well-groomed silver fur to shine. At least I got a nice view to comfort me. A bright smile dawns on his face as he makes his way over to my side of the bed. Not as nice as mine. He starts to bend over in an attempt to plant a kiss on my forehead. At the last second, I jerk my head upwards instead, resulting in our lips meeting. There's a brief flash of surprise, but it dissipates quickly and I feel his smile widen as he puts more effort into the kiss. We both linger there, neither wanting to break the moment. A small growl comes from his stomach, putting an end to the passionate moment with a laugh. Sounds like someone's hungry. As if on cue, I hear my own stomach growl in a clear act of betrayal. Marshall laughs at the sound. Seems like I'm not the only one. He crosses back over the closet and pulls out one of his navy blue button-up work shirts. A small wave of disappointment hits me now that he's clothed. Are you sure you can't just go back to bed? Your spot is still warm. I rub my hand on his side of the bed, attempting to be seductive despite my drooping eyelids and definite bedhead. He pretends to ponder the question for a moment before shaking his head. Sorry, Dorian, but breakfast isn't going to make itself. I let out a long, overdramatic sigh as I see a spark of mischief in Marshall's eyes. I'll go get the coffee started. That should wake you up enough to make sure that you don't burn the omelets again. He hastily exits the room, giggling to himself, disappearing from my eyeline before I have the chance to throw a pillow at him. You know that only happened once. I call after him, lowering my soft weapon. I lay there for a few more moments, gathering what little energy I can before I throw out the blankets. Cold morning air bites at my exposed skin, causing a shiver to go down my spine. Hurriedly, I make my way over to the closet and pull out some clothes. Sweatpants and one of Marshall's tees should work for now. I can always dress up later if I need to go out. Pulling the shirt over my head, it's clearly too big for me, but nevertheless, it provides me a sense of comfort. I grab some of the hem and inhale, getting a whiff of my boyfriend's pleasant citrusy scent that he likes to shampoo his fur with. With my skin now covered, I can feel the warmth returning to my body once more. I look longingly at the bed, wishing to be wrapped under its thick covers again. I give it a gentle pat on my way out the door. Don't worry, old girl, I'll be back soon. I make my way out of the kitchen, rubbing the remaining sleep from my eyes. Arriving just in time, I catch Marshall finishing up pouring our coffees. He He adds some milk and a good amount of sugar to his while leaving mine black. He hands me my mug as he passes, stealing a quick kiss. The scent of the coffee reaches my nose, already beginning to stir me awake. I take a sip of the hot bitter liquid and let out a sigh of relief. The coffee starts to work its magic as I feel a pit of warmth now in my stomach. The caffeine begins to circulate through me. Marshall looks at me and shakes his head in a mock disapproving manner from his seat at the island. I still never understand how you can drink that stuff straight. The moment those words leave his lips, I can see a look of regret cross his face, knowing what's about to exit my mouth. It's probably the only thing I like straight. He groans, trying and failing to hide a smirk as I chuckle at my own bad joke. Taking a hair tie from my wrist, I put my hair into a bun so that it stays out of my face while I cook breakfast. I begin my prep, taking out the ingredients I'll need for both breakfast and lunch. Since Marshall doesn't have many good food options near his work, I usually pack him a lunch for him. With the ingredients we have today, our usual breakfast omelets are on the menu, though we'll need more eggs soon, with lunch being a BLT with extra bacon. Bacon was one of the foods we first bonded over, before omelets, and has always been a favorite of Marshall's. Even one day where our meals wouldn't usually have bacon, I made sure to pack him some. Gotta keep my wolf happy after all. As I cook, the two of us make the occasional small talk, the effects of the coffee helping us along. Speaking of food, what's for dinner tonight? Not sure yet. Somebody forgot to go grocery shopping yesterday. Marshall glances sheepishly down into his mug. Come on, Deputy. I just wanted to spend some more time with you. A smile creeps onto my face hearing him call me that nickname. Since his name is Marshall, he likes to call me his deputy whenever I have to remind him of something. It's cute. I'll go while you're at work today. Got any requests? His face brightens and I see his tail swish back and forth from the corner of my eye. Something sweet. Typical Marshall and his sweet tooth. A devious idea begins to form in my mind. Something sweet, huh? That can be done. I bend over to grab a pan, making sure to stick my ass out. The trick works and I catch him staring at it. Our eyes meet and I give him a wink. Sorry, Marshy, but the cake will have to be saved for later. He flusters at that and buries his face in his mug as I start on the omelets. The rest of the meal is made in a comfortable silence. Luckily, with the simplicity of the food and my experience cooking, that doesn't take long. I set the food on the counter and make my way around to join him, refilling my coffee as I go. Barely able to contain myself, the moment I sit down, he begins shoveling the food into his muzzle. I smile at the joy my cooking brings him, feeling his tail occasionally whack me in his food-fueled bliss. Don't forget to chew. A blush creeps onto his face at my comment, and he slows his pace, allowing me to start catching up with his progress. We sit there together and eat, not needing to speak, to just enjoy the presence of each other. There were so many people I'd fallen for in the past, but none were quite like Marshall. None managed to make me feel the way I do whenever I look at him, a sense of pure love. The happiest times of my life have been while I'm dating him. As we take our last few bites, I bring the dishes into the kitchen as Marshall starts getting ready for work again. Slipping some extra bacon into his lunch bag for the sandwich, I go to meet him at the door. He takes the paper bag from me, and I let him pull me into his strong, furry arms. Feeling the warmth of him once again, I look up at my wolf. Are you sure I can't convince you to stay home today? He sighs, knowing he wants to stay as much as I want him to. Sorry, Dorian, but I got a new trainee in today. Plus, I need the sick days saved up for our vacation in the summer. I know, but that doesn't mean that I won't miss you. He gives a light laugh as I pout and bring his head down to mine for another kiss. I'll miss you too. We stand in the embrace for a moment longer before stepping apart. I love you, Dorian. See you tonight. See you tonight, Marshy. I love you too. We give each other one last goodbye kiss as he steps out the door for work. Our eyes meet, each full of love before the door shuts behind him. I'm left alone in the now silent apartment, unaware of what was to come. If only I had tried a little harder to make him stay. If only his alarm had never gone off that morning. If only we had stayed in our bed together. Maybe that morning wouldn't have been the last time I saw you, Marshall. Maybe we had been together when it happened. When the world as we knew it collapsed. Arc 1. Welcome to the Apocalypse. Dear Marshall, it's getting harder to keep track of the days now. They all sort of blur together into a congealed mess of memories. But of course, I can't forget today. I dreamt of it last night, my mind's way of reminding me what happened a year ago. It was the day that I last saw you. The day the apocalypse began. I'm still searching for you, Marshall. I know you're somewhere out there. If someone like me can survive in this mess for so long, you sure as hell can. For once, I'm thankful for the torrents of rain the spring brought in this year. Some new pathways were cleared through the debris, expanding my search radius. Hopefully this will give me some new leads. That is, if... No. I can't think like that. I won't. If I do, there's no way that I'll be able to make it through. I will find you. I promise. See you soon. Dorian. As I close the journal, I lean back and stretch out my muscles to get rid of the morning exhaustion. Despite giving myself a few additional hours of rest this morning to make up for what little sleep I've gotten this week, the dream caused me to toss and turn all night. I wasn't going to let that stop me today, though. With the first part of my morning ritual complete, I moved on to my next. The inventory check. Matches? Check. Water? Check. Multi-tool? Check. I continued through the list of items, satisfyingly marking them all down with their appropriate amounts. My current amount of rations was to be noted. I only had enough to last me a few more days, which meant that I'd have to scavenge in the city soon. I returned everything back to its place, making sure the supplies were neatly organized. In the unlikely event that I'd had to make a quick escape, it was always better to be prepared. Grabbing my makeshift spear, which consisted of a kitchen knife screwed to a long metal pole, I stood up in my tent to start the next part of the routine. The task required me to go outside and investigate the perimeter check. Before I even had a chance to take a step out, a loud clang of metal rang out from somewhere nearby. Something had just set off my makeshift perimeter alarm. I halted at the flaps, silently waiting to hear what would come next. With no further sounds provided, I slowly walked outside. Each step was hesitant and careful, not wanting to make any unnecessary noise. Thankfully, it was still daylight, and I used that fact to my advantage as I surveyed the area quickly. My camp was set up in a small clearing, trees shadowing the edges of it. The earth was relatively rough with occasional patches of concrete debris scattered throughout with patches of yellow grass. The campfire at the center remained a mound of charcoal, the embers of last night's fire long since burned out. The site seemed to be relatively undisturbed. I took a deep breath, allowing myself to give a more focused survey of the area and hone my mind on the situation. There are only 3 possibilities that I could think of that would have triggered the perimeter alarm. The first and most hopeful option, a simple wild animal. Probably wandered too close trying to get a look at whatever had set up this unnatural nest in its space. The second, but manageable option, bandits. I had encountered a group of them around a week ago, making sure to stay out of sight as they scavenged. Luckily, I got away unnoticed with some of their rations. It was nice having the universe on your side sometimes. The third option was the worst of the bunch, one I didn't want to even consider in case my thoughts managed to will it into existence. At that moment, I spotted a hint of movement from the corner of my eye. Gotcha. Just barely poking out from a nearby tree was a silhouette of a furred elbow. Cautiously, I began navigating around the sticks and rougher earth that littered the ground. I had to be stealthy about this. I had no clues as to who had found my camp. If they were an enemy, I'd need the advantage of surprise on my side. I strayed closer and closer to the figure, moving like a faint breeze through the grass. They hadn't seemed to notice my presence yet, remained still in their place. A growing sense of discomfort began to gnaw at my stomach. This entire scenario didn't sit right with me. It was possible that the person had to run to hide after setting off the alarm, freezing in place behind a tree. That would confirm whoever it was had business with me, and it probably wasn't good. In that case, the best course of action would be to continue my approach and catch them off guard. Hopefully, that would be enough to turn the tide in my favor. Alternately, there was another possibility. One that would benefit from me remaining where I was. As slib Oz as they were, there was a chance that that wasn't a person at all. I've watched enough horror movies that that either of these approaches is bad. It's more like get away. What happens if I approach? I continued to approach the figure, deciding this was the route that would give me the best odds. If this was a single bandit, I could take them on with ease. Most of the time when I encountered one, they were just some dumb lackey who I could beat in a fight or outsmart. This one seemed to be no different if he thought he was doing a good job at hiding from me. If it was a bandit, that is. No, it was. I wasn't going to consider the other option. Spear raised, I took extra caution as I neared the tree. I began to circle it, not daring to even breathe in case I could hear it. The outline of the figure began to appear, and in one swift movement I raised my spear to the neck. All right, hands where I can see them. There wasn't even so much as a twitch from the figure. Maybe a threat would get them to respond. All it takes is one quick jab and you're dead. No funny games now. Put your hands up. I pushed the spear tip slightly harder into the neck. The figure remained stock still, ignoring my threat. I continued my way around the tree, annoyed at the lack of response. Either you have the nerves of steel, or you're one dumb motherfuck. With my sight no longer obscured, I was able to get a full glimpse at the person. A humanoid polar bear stood there, back pressed against the tree. His gaze was pointed towards the ground. A tree branch was impaling him through his midsection. Well, shit. It was a trap. Out of nowhere, a loud shuffling sounded out from behind me, and I let my instincts kick in. I dodged out of the way in the nick of time, watching in surprise as a blur of movements swipes at where I was standing moments before. Rolling back onto my feet, I took a look at the creature that attacked me. It takes a step out from its cover, now in the open. The brief moments of sunlight that peek through the canopy as the breeze causes the branches to shift allows me to take in the horrible sight as I meet the gaze of two pitch-black eyes. At the center of them are two scarlet irises that seem to pierce right through me, burning with a deep and primal anger. Ratty and sparse long hair framed its sunken face, the mouth opened unnaturally wide, as if its jaw were dislocated. Inside were rows of razor-sharp teeth, with two fangs, the most prominent of them, all at the front. Its skin had taken on a darkened gray hue, pulled taut, not just over the face, but over the rest of its body too, highlighting the oversized bones within. It approached on all fours like a wild animal, the long, lanky limbs guiding it forward, claws leaving trails through the dirt. Of course, it had to be this. I should have expected no less from this shit-show world. The third option was our winner after all. A faded. I barely had time to process my bad luck as it sent another attack my way. I parried the blow, but it caused me to lose my footing, yet I narrowly avoided the next strike. I was at a disadvantage here. There was little space for me to dodge, and I was way too close to the monster for comfort. I leapt backwards as its claws raked the earth once more, but I wasn't able to jump far enough and the dust clouded my vision. There was a sudden and sharp pain in my side as I was flung away, having been caught by a blackened smack. Stars swam across my vision as my backside collided with a nearby tree. I fell onto my knees, wheezing from the breath being knocked out of me. This wasn't good. I had been careless, and this was my punishment. I tried to stand up and failed, feeling myself running low on energy. I'd have to wait for it to get closer and hope that I'd be able to land a final blow. And if I failed, it all ended here. It wasn't fair that I would die here before I got to see Marshall one last time. But I suppose life wasn't very fair in general. In a final act of resistance, I brought my head up to stare at the Fated one last time, showing no fear in my eyes. I wouldn't allow it that satisfaction. However, as we locked eyes, there was a brief whistling before the sound of an impact against flesh. The creature suddenly released a cry of pain and whirled around, an arrow now protruding from its hind leg. It was searching through the brush, hoping to catch a glimpse of the attacker. It let out another pained cry as a second arrow hit it in the shoulder. The Fated, forgetting about me, looked around trying to spot the culprit. Big mistake. Using the last of my energy, I charged forward with a pained battle cry. It turned towards me, ready to attack, but I was already there. Using the swing of its head and my forward momentum, I sliced the tip of the spear through its neck. A spray of blackened blood showered me as I stood there, panting. The creature collapsed to the ground, dead, leaving me the last man standing. Looks like I get to live another day. The exhaustion of the brief fight and my injuries began catching up to me simultaneously, causing me to sink to my knees once more. "Hey, are you okay?" A voice called out from somewhere in the trees. I looked around, trying to find the source of it. Approaching me, I saw a silhouette of a figure carrying a bow and an arrow. It was the last thing that I saw while I was falling towards the earth below. And then I blacked out. Dear Marshall, I read online somewhere that keeping a journal is a good way to process your emotions. As cheesy as it sounds, like how much I miss you. Amongst other things, of course, can't just be thinking of you all the time now, can I? Why am I trying to justify myself to a book? Yes, this is mostly to help me get through the time spent without you when I'm in the apartment alone. I know it's only for a couple of hours, but this place feels a bit empty when you're gone. Your presence is so comforting that when it's not there, I feel like a small piece of myself is missing with it. We've been dating for a little over a year and a half now and already have an apartment together. For most, it would probably seem too fast, but with you, Marshall, it feels just right. I never really knew just how good love could feel until I met you. And yet, it's still surprising in a lot of ways. I've only just started to realize how much I rely on you. Whether it's to be there when I'm hurting or even just to have someone whose tail wags vigorously when eating my cooking, I've come to rely on that sense of joy that accompanies you. It helps me get through the days, especially the darker ones. At this point, I'm not sure what I'd do without you. I've always patiently awaited your return as well, waiting near the door as the hours come to close, as if I were the dog in this relationship. Yeah, I'm definitely not letting you see this journal. It feels a bit silly to be writing this all down. Keeping a catalog of my daily thoughts and emotions, as if they'd be important later. At the same time, though, I can't deny it's oddly comforting to have this to be able to look back at someday. I'm sure it'll provide me with some good laughs as time goes on. Aside from that thought, when you get home tonight, it'll mark the start of the weekend. Which means I'll have several days with you to myself. Well, I think that'll do as a first entry for now. See you soon, my wolf. Love, Dorian. Pain. That's the first feeling that overwhelms me as my mind begins to drift back towards consciousness. I can feel the ache spread through my entire body, the soreness most concentrated towards my shoulder. It feels as though I've been run over by a small semi-truck. An involuntary groan escapes my lips as I begin to try and sit up, removing the blanket covering me. I have a bit of trouble trying to move my left arm for whatever reason, so I rely mostly on my right to move me into a seated position. Looking down, the arm is in some kind of makeshift sling strung across my chest. Shit, what happened? My voice comes out slightly raspy and hurts my throat. I take a moment then to actually look myself over, finding more than just the sling wrapped up. I'm covered in bandages, scattered across my arms, legs, and torso. Most of my clothing has been removed, save for my underwear. For as sore as I am, I can still tell that all this dressing is overkill, and I know for a fact that I didn't have this much first aid with me on my last inventory check. Which means somebody must have dressed my wounds, and were definitely overly cautious when doing so. But who? There's a flash through my mind at that, as it races to catch up on my missing memories from earlier in the day. I fought a faded and almost lost to it had I not received help from that figure I saw before I blacked out. Were they the one that helped me? As if on cue, there's a shuffling sound from outside, and that familiar silhouette steps through the tent flaps. Deep breaths, deep breaths. I'm sure he's just Oh! Staring down at me is a tall, lanky bat frozen in place at the sight of my now cautious form. His face almost seems to be wearing a mask, black fur covering it in contrast to the brown fur on the rest of his body. A body I can get a good view of due to his odd fashion choice. On his torso he wears a black crop top, room left at the sides for his wings, but leaving his midriff exposed. Slung across his back is a quiver full of arrows, presumably the same ones that had shot the faded earlier. His legs are covered by a pair of jeans, ripped and faded beyond belief. To accentuate all of this, he wears a tattered, light pink scarf draped across his shoulders. You're awake. Oh, thank God you're awake. I was so worried I had messed something up. He takes a step towards me, causing me to reach for my spear on instinct. Forgetting the fact that my arm is in a sling, I jerk to the side and throw myself off balance, resulting in me falling onto my shoulder. A startled yelp escapes my lips on the suddenness of the impact. The bat rushes towards me, dropping the bow he was holding and reaching out his hands. I try to wiggle away, but I feel him grab me and bring me into a sitting position once more. Easy there, you're still hurt. He sits across from me once I'm stabilized, but I glare at him with a look of distrust. He may have helped me, but I still don't know what his intentions were. I try to ask him where my spear is, but a cough comes out instead, the result of my dry throat. He reaches to his side and removes a canteen, unscrewing the cap and holding it out towards me. My hands begin to move upward, but I hesitate. Even though I want to immediately grab the water, I err to the side of caution. I have no way of knowing whether the liquid is safe to drink or not. Seeing this, the stranger brings the canteen to his own lips and takes an audible drink, a bit of water dribbling out the side of his mouth. See? Perfectly safe. I promise, I'm friendly. Holding out the canteen again, I hesitate for only a second before grabbing it, hungrily gulping down the water. I gasp in relief as I come up for air, feeling satisfied with the moisture now returned to my mouth. A pleased look crosses the face of the bat, one that seems to be genuinely happy that I'm okay. It catches me off guard, seeing that level of purity in his eyes. It's something that I haven't seen in so long, likely not since our world began to fracture. I feel the walls I had built up lower a bit at that, a part of me wanting to trust him. Curiosity bubbles up inside of me, wanting to know more. Clearing my throat, I find my voice again. I appreciate the help, but I don't believe I caught your name while I was asleep. He blinks a few times, processing that, his cheeks flush in embarrassment as he realizes he hadn't introduced himself yet. Oh, right. Of course, how could I forget? My name's Xavier. What's yours? Dorian. His smile widens at that. A pleasure to meet you, Dorian. How are you feeling, by the way? I did my best to patch you up, but I don't really have a lot of experience with first aid. I take the time now to remove my arm from the sling, stretching out a bit to get a feel for whatever damage Xavier had thought I'd taken. Aside from the soreness, it didn't feel all too bad. The pain I'd felt when I woke up earlier nearly non-existent. All things considered, I think I'm fine, though all the bandages seem to be overkill. I gesture to my near mummified body to accentuate my point. He lets out a small laugh at that and rubs the back of his neck. Yeah, not my finest work. Let me help redo them, but this time you can take the lead. With his help, the two of us get to work unwrapping the dressings, revealing many bruises beneath. While I'd usually never let someone I just met get this close to me, I don't really have much of a choice. For now, I have to rely on him a bit, keep him close until I have more information. To our surprise, we found very few cuts on my body. I'd expected at least some reason for this overreaction, but the bruises would be the only reason for that, and even then, it's not good enough. Although that didn't explain his surprise. As if reading my mind, he starts speaking. I swear, you looked a lot worse when I found you. You were completely covered in scratches and I could see the bruising starting. Your shoulder had even been dislocated. I put it back in place while you slept. That explained the soreness in that area. I give him a reassuring pat before I started to get dressed, my body no longer heavily wrapped. No need to worry about that. Better to overdo it than underdo it when it comes to things like these. I'm sure you were just scared after fighting the Fated. He stares at me with confusion stretched across his features. You mean that big monster thing? I let out a laugh at that. I suppose that's one term for it, yes. Most just call them the Fated, though. Something that looked like hope sparked behind his eyes. There are others? More survivors like us? Of course there are. He seemed overjoyed at that, as if it were the best news he'd ever received. It had been years since the start of the apocalypse. There was no way he hadn't encountered anyone else in that time. I knew something was off about Xavier, but I couldn't put my finger on what. I looked at him again, thinking over my options. Although I had been somewhat injured from the last fight, from what I could tell, his main weapon was a bow. A long-range fighter in close quarters was an obvious disadvantage. I definitely had more muscle than him. He had some definition in his arms, but I was confident that I could beat him in a fight if it came down to it. With that assessment out of the way, I was determined to get my answers. Who are you? Now it was his turn to be caught off guard. I'm Xavier, remember? I know you said you were fine, but maybe you really did hit your head hard. I brush off his hands as he tries to reach towards me, concerned. No. That's not what I meant. I was asking who you are, as in what's your story? How can you act so upbeat and innocent after all that's happened? How can you not know what a Fated is, or that there are other survivors after a full year? I'll ask you again, Xavier. Who are you? Xavier shifted at that, seemingly uncomfortable with my questions. Well, His squirming was starting to annoy me, but I kept myself in check, even reining the earlier attitude back a bit, thinking about how the question sounded. The best way to get answers out of someone like him was to be kind, but direct. Besides, after seeing his bow skills earlier, he'd likely be better as an ally than an enemy. Take a deep breath, kid. You already have my respect for saving me from that Fated. You don't have to be afraid to tell me what happened to you. Taking a moment, the bat began to compose himself before speaking once more. It's not that I'm afraid to tell you. It's just something I'd rather not relive. I felt a pang of sympathy at that, knowing the sensation all too well. You can keep the details scarce then. Just tell me what you can. It'll help the both of us. He took another deep breath before continuing. Simple. I can do simple. This will sound wild, but hear me out. When whatever happened, I was in a bunker. I blinked a few times, processing his words. A bunker? Yes. My parents were unique in their beliefs, let's say. We had a bunker as if it were a normal thing. Bunker cleaning was amongst my chores. I was down there when everything above ground happened. I tried to get out, but the hatch mechanism had been damaged. So I was stuck down there alone for, based on what I think you said earlier, nearly a year. A year. A full year stuck alone with no view of the outside world. I understand now why he didn't want to talk about it. That would have been its own kind of hell. How'd he manage to stay sane so long, I hadn't the slightest clue. It also explained why he has so little knowledge of everything going on out here. I had so many questions I wanted to ask, but I should get him to trust me more before I try to pry deeper. Still, there was something I had to know. How did you get out? A sad smile was on his face, something that made me feel guilty comparing it to what I'd seen from him earlier. And while what he'd shown earlier was genuine, it was clear now there was a lot more going on under the surface. As it turns out, the foundation hadn't been as structurally stable as I thought. Water had worn away at one of the walls, causing it to break suddenly and the bunker to flood. I grabbed what I could and took one last breath before I swam to the surface. I'm not sure how long ago that was. Maybe 3 days? It's hard to keep track of time with whatever is going on with the sky. A silence settled over us at that, me taking in everything I've just been told while Xavier relived the painful memories once again. Xavier was the first to break it. So, why'd you call me kid earlier? I tried to hold in a grin at that obvious subject change. It was clear he wanted to lighten the mood, and I was more than willing to play along. Well, because you're a kid. How am I a kid? Just from looking at you in comparison to me, it's clear I have years on you. You look to be as old as I am. How old are you then? 25. He looked at me, bewildered. 25? I'm 22. That's only a difference of 3 years. You're barely older, and definitely not old enough to be calling me kid. I imitated a look of fake shock, bringing my hands to my chest. Now, come on, kid. Is that any way to be speaking to your elders? We stared at each other for a few moments before we both burst out laughing, the tension of the moment now broken thanks to Xavier. It had been a while since I laughed like this, let alone gotten along this well with somebody so fast. I know, though, that could only last so long. As our laughter began to die down, I could see Xavier getting ready to ask me something else. Okay, so I answered some of your questions, but I still have plenty of my own. The world is so different now compared to before. I nodded at him, knowing where this was going. Don't have to tell me twice. I've lived through it. Fair is fair, though, and you deserve to know what's happening. So, what do you want to know? Given that he had next to no knowledge of this new age, I'm sure he had a multitude of questions. There were very few similarities that remained over the past year, with a lot of them having no proper explanation either. All I could do was try and answer his questions with what I'd seen or heard. A small sense of dread crept up my spine, as if it knew that whatever the next question would be, I wouldn't like it. Well, how about when it all started? What was it like? That confirmed the sensation. He really had wasted no time diving immediately into the hard-hitting questions. I suppose there was something to be admired in that, though, the avoidance of unnecessary topics. I thought back to that day, giving an involuntary shudder at that memory. Are you sure you want to know that first? It's not exactly light-hearted stuff. If I didn't think I could handle it, I wouldn't have asked. I have a year to catch up on. I need to have some knowledge of everything. The determination in his voice told me I wasn't getting out of this, and it was only fair that I tell him something in return. A trauma for a trauma, I suppose. I closed my eyes as I allowed the waves of memories to wash over me. It was ordinary that day, when it first started. Everyone was going about their usual morning habits. I was in my apartment. The clock had struck noon a while prior. I had changed clothes so that I could make a trip to the store. I had planned on making an assortment of baked goods. What kind? I felt a smile on my face at the question. Cookies, tarts, an assortment of muffins. Just a variety of delicacies. Marshall's sweet tooth was never satisfied, so I wanted to make sure that I had enough to last. I was going over my list and double-checking I had everything, my reusable bags hanging from my arm, when it started. I'd never experienced an earthquake before, and neither had most people who live here, so I was confused. Of course we read about them in school, but it was a surprise to feel one. The tremors were gentle at first, rattling the objects on the shelves of my living room. I held onto a table while I waited for it to pass. But it didn't. Instead, the tremors grew more violent. I made my way to the living room on unsteady feet, hoping to catch a glimpse of the chaos outside. And chaotic it was. I could see other buildings shaking as well, cracks appearing in the pavements on the street below. People everywhere were stunned, unsure of what to make of themselves as the earthquake worsened. Suddenly, fractures began to creep up the walls of a nearby building. Our infrastructure wasn't well equipped for a situation like this. A cloud of dust puffed out the sides as the floor collapsed onto itself, causing the top half to lean and crash into another skyscraper nearby. That is what finally broke people from their stupor. I could see the chaos breaking in the street below as people began to flee, those in their cars trying to avoid crashing as debris rained down from above. I couldn't let myself die here though, so I forced my gaze away and began to gather a few things I knew the location of. Running to my room, I took out my hiking pack from the closet, throwing in an extra outfit just in case. I grabbed my journals as well as a few mementos that were important to me. Lastly, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and a pack of matches. I didn't know what was happening and I wanted to be prepared for anything. I took a look at my house once more, something telling me that this would be likely the last I saw of it. My gaze then settled on the window outside. A complex from across the street was now falling victim to the quakes as well, and it seemed to be leaning in our direction. Wasting no time, I flung the door open, dashing to the stairs and throwing myself down them. Although living high up had given me the advantage of a view, the negative side of that being I had to descend so many flights of stairs in such a brief time. I passed a few people who were also fleeing, holding what little belongings they could manage. I reached the bottom of the stairwell and held the door open, ushering the people out when I heard the impact from high above. The last person stumbled out the door, a young feline man around my age, and I grabbed them before they could fall, the two of us dashing across the lobby to get outside. The people ahead of us had already left, not bothering to wait around. With each moment that passed, the crashing grew louder as the building was collapsing. Holding my bag in front of us, I didn't bother trying for the door handle, instead using the force of our combined weight to shatter the glass and send us onto the street. We rolled across the pavement just in time, a concussive blast of air sending us hurtling further and faster as the building finished its collapse. I was left coughing and stunned, my ears ringing from it all. I was disoriented, but I knew I couldn't stop. Hoping the man was alright and doing the same, I began to run. I wasn't sure where I was going, instead letting my body take me where it wanted to. However, as I fled, there seemed to be some kind of energy in the air. It began to build before it went out in a pulse. Cars stopped running, lights flicked before going out completely. An airplane high in the sky above began hurtling towards the ground below. Not letting it stop me, I ran. I ran and I ran until I was heaving and my legs had long pushed past their limit. When I eventually collapsed from the exhaustion, I found myself on the outskirts of town near a forest I had often hiked through, a place I was familiar with. The sky had changed too, now decorated with the hues of twilight way too early. After a few minutes, I sat up, taking a look at the city from afar. If I hadn't lived there my whole life, I'm not sure I would have recognized what it had become. Now, it was a smattering of broken buildings, light reflecting off the shattered glass. I could only sit there and stare, not knowing how many lives had been lost or what my next steps would be. That's what it was like at the beginning. I opened my eyes again, seeing the familiarity of the inside of my tent, and bringing a hand to my face, wiping the few tears that had fallen during the retelling. I looked over to Xavier, who wouldn't meet my gaze, likely ashamed of having me recap my trauma and comparing it to his own. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how rough it must have been for you. I never should have. I cut him off with a wave of my hand. It's fine, and I'm fine. Everyone has their own story to tell, and it's only fair that I share mine with you after everything. Silence once again passed over us as I waited for the next question, allowing both of us a few moments of respite. I guess it's true what they say. About what? People. Never judge a book by its cover, as the phrase goes. I don't think either of us could have expected what the other was going to say. I doubt we even expected them to be our reality. Sure, some believed in the eventual end of the world, but nobody could have known that we'd actually be living it. Xavier gave me a little small nod, as if waiting for me to continue. And I agree with you. Everyone has their own life. It's impossible to tell what's truly going on beneath the surface at just a simple glance. We both just proved that fact to each other. With the way things are, everyone has suffered their own trauma. How they let it affect them is what matters. Did they succumb to it, giving in to the dark intentions? Or did they use it as a boost to grow stronger, to help them move forward and assist those around them? That's the kind of world that we've always lived in, but the effects now are increased tenfold. After pondering my words for a few moments, Xavier spoke up. I choose to believe that no matter what, there's always a way to recover. Everyone has the ability to improve themselves for the better. It may be the harder route sometimes, but they'll get there one day, even if they need that extra push. Nobody is inherently good nor evil. It's the life that they lead that shapes them. Sometimes, you just have to help them reach a better mold. This world may be broken now, but maybe one day it can be fixed. I hope to be on the side that makes it all okay again. I stared at Xavier, sharing a soft smile with him. He was a lot more insightful than I had originally given him credit for, and it was nice to see his optimism shine through. Everyone could use a little more of that kind of outlook, myself included. I hope to be there with you too, kid. For now, though, anything else you want to ask? Just one more question, as I'm sure I won't like the answer either, and I'll need some time to process everything you've told me. What is that monster we fought? I think you called it something that started with an F? The Fated. He snapped and shot me finger guns. That's the one. Well, he was right about the first part. The answer to this wasn't something he'd like, and wasn't one I liked either. This is another heavy one, so I suggest you steel yourself. As always, there isn't a full explanation I can provide, but there are some things that I can tell you for certain. Are you ready? Xavier took a moment before nodding the go-ahead. To keep it simple, the Fated are people. Or, at least they used to be. It was another cruel effect from the apocalypse. A few weeks after the initial incident, everyone was waiting for some kind of help. There were many injured hoping to be treated, others trying to find lost family. They waited and waited, but after a while, it started to become clear no help was coming. It was at that point that the first Fated emerged. A small encampment of survivors had gathered together, hoping that somehow they'd find a savior amongst them. Instead, they were met with a gurgle of their own blood, choking out their prayers as the creatures slashed out their throats. More began to appear after that, seemingly out of nowhere. It wasn't until two friends were together that the change was first witnessed. One of them had watched their partner die before them a few days prior, and it broke them. The friend tried comforting her, but she was too lost in her own grief. They woke up in the night to see their grieving friend beginning to change, taking on a more monstrous form and an insatiable bloodlust. They tried calling out to her, but it was too late, their voice landing on deaf ears. That's why we call them the Fated. There's nothing more than husks of their former selves, losing all aspects that once gave them heart. They come in a variety of shapes and sizes, each with their own defining traits and displaying varying levels of intelligence. It's rare that you'll find two of the same kind, however, which is both a blessing and a curse. No matter what, though, it's best to avoid them at all costs. We were lucky to have made it out alive today. Most share of worse fate. I took my gaze off my feet and back to Xavier, who was staring at his own now. It wasn't something easy to learn about. I even had trouble believing it first when I first heard it. What must hurt the most was the fact that we had killed something that had once been a person. Someone like us. I crawled my way over to the side of the tent, draping an arm over his shoulders. I probably could have spared some of the gorier details, but it was important he knew what he was up against, what these creatures really were, and what they were capable of. He leaned in towards me, needing his much more than I did. I no longer had any suspicions that he'd been faking anything he told me. Xavier would need an ally in this world, someone he could trust. Right now, I had to be that person for him. As we sat there, I could feel exhaustion pulling at me once more, my body not quite done in its recovery despite having slept several hours. It occurred to me that I hadn't actually checked what time it was. I reached over to my pack and began to rummage inside of it, searching for the item I was after. It only took me a few moments before I found it, a small golden pocket watch. I recovered it from my pack and began to turn it over in my hands. Flipping it open, I see the small hand pointing towards the 6, the minute hand a quarter past the 12. That meant I had been out for nearly 7 hours now. No wonder Xavier had been worried about me. Before closing it, I run my thumbs across our engraved initials inside, the emotions beginning to bubble up. It was a gift from Marshall that he had given me for my last birthday before the apocalypse. I smile at the memory. I told him not to get me anything that year, but my wolf always liked to be a rebel against things like that. I never forgot the line he said when he gave it to me, one that was corny as hell. To help keep track of all the time spent lost in my eyes. There was a small pang in my heart at that, but I closed the pocket watch and returned my attention back towards my companion. Alright, I think that's enough for now. I have a few things to do, but I would appreciate it if you got a head start on the fire for us. Think you can manage that? He gave me a small nod of acknowledgement and remained seated. I went back over to my pack and grabbed a few things I needed, taking the fire starting supplies and leaving them next to Xavier. Whenever you're ready. Opening the flaps of the tent, I was now able to get a view of the aftermath of the fight. Scattered debris aside, the place seemed relatively the same, the only signs of fighting being the now dried black blood that coated the ground. As I'd seen a glimpse of it earlier, the site was now illuminated by the dull glow of the twilight sky. The remaining rays of warm light were just bright enough that I could move on to the task at hand. There were bodies that needed to be investigated. I made my way over to the faded first, the now unmistakable reek of death overpowering my nose the closer I got. Opening one of my journals, I started my inspection of the corpse. No recent additional external damage seemed to be present itself that wasn't a result from our fight. However, there were a few scars across its body that had long since healed. Just those few facts alone already told me some things. The first was that this had been an older faded, not one that had been around since the start, but not a fresh victim to the transformation either. The second was that we clearly had not been its first quarry. There was no telling just how many it had killed during its reign, but at least some had a fighting chance. Lastly, the creature had not fed in a while. Pairing the lack of prior wounds to the fragile state it seemed to be in, skin tight around its elongated bones, gave me the picture that the fight with us had been out of desperation and greed. There was still more info that needed to be gleaned before I could establish a proper theory, so I continued my investigation. Nothing else seemed to be out of the ordinary, and I was able to move on when I noticed a splash of color near its mouth. Red. Leaning in closer, I could make out traces of blood near two fangs I had seen earlier. Making a mental note of that, I walked over to my next task. As I approached the second body, the stench of death began to lessen. In fact, there was barely a trace of it coming from the polar bear. I was able now to get a better look at the man since the impending threat had been reduced to a rotting mound. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, clothed and fur covered in a layer of grime. He'd likely been picked up from traveling. From the way his clothes hung off of him, he could easily be written off as skinny. However, it seemed as though his fur was unnaturally baggy as well as despite having a healthy sheen. The tree branch he was impaled on had a distinct lack of blood on it, only a few trickles dried into the wood. This was definitely a secondary wound, one received after death. Moving the body off the branch, it only took me a few seconds to find what I had been looking for. Bingo. On the back of his neck were two puncture marks, the clothing just below it having been soaked up in a bit of blood. Just as I thought, the creature had bitten him and sucked the moisture from his body. The missing fluids explained why he looked deflated and lacked the smell of rot, the bacteria having a harder time feasting on dried flesh. The pieces of the puzzle had now fallen in place. Fated don't have a tendency to venture out this far usually, preferring to remain in the ruins that were once a thriving city. It had either struggled to find life or had been driven out of its territory by another of its kind. Starving, it had made its way out here on a whim, entered the creature's stroke of luck where the polar bear appeared. Sneaking up on the unsuspecting victim, the monster seized the opportunity and bit down, draining the hydration from the man. Then nearby, it spotted my camp. It must have believed today was a miracle, the possibility of more food driving its greed. It laid the trap then, placing the polar bear against a tree and triggering the alarm, whether on purpose or by accident I couldn't know. It waited in the shadows then, overconfidence dousing its corrupt mind as it hoped to play with its food. Unfortunately for it, there had been two of us and we gained the upper hand. I couldn't possibly know how much of my assessment had been accurate, but it helped me process it all, making it easier to handle this as if I were a TV detective. It allowed me a sliver of separation from reality, something much needed. There was still one question on my mind, though, and that was why the man was nearby in the first place. Searching the body, I began to rifle through his pockets for a clue about his identity. They were mostly empty aside from a few basic survival items like a pocket knife. Opening his jacket let me know what I was looking for. Sewn in just below the collar was a golden thread with a symbol of a house with its door open, something I recognized. The symbol of Haven. It took about 2 hours, and it was relatively shallow, but I managed to dig a grave for the fallen bear. Although I didn't know him, he still deserved as best a burial as I could give him. I had taken a moment to cut the symbol out of his jacket, deeming that it would be useful later on. The sun had finally vanished from the sky, leaving most things lit by the moon. The campsite, however, was embraced by the warm light of the fire, successfully lit by Xavier, who was seated nearby. I walked over and sat next to him quietly. He seemed to be doing better now that there was more of a weight on his shoulders, the invisible burden of the newfound knowledge dragging him a bit. "How are you holding up? I know you've got a lot on your mind after today." His gaze was focused on the flames as they licked at the air hungrily, the crackle of burning wood accompanying the sight. Better than I thought I would be. I still have a lot of questions, but I appreciate the straightforwardness. There's a comfort in knowing what awaits me out there than remaining oblivious. Thank you for that. I smiled softly at him, happy to hear it. In a lot of cases, people will shield others from the horrors of the world, leaving them not knowing what to do when they come face to face with them. It's better they knew when they did than have them unprepared for later. The world is so much different now, something I can tell even though I haven't been above ground long. It's surprising just how much can change in a year. The same could be said before this all happened, though. With the way the world was going, all the new technological advancements, creativity higher than it had ever been, and interesting scientific discoveries. Each year you could reflect on the previous one and be shocked at the comparison. Society had really come far. Xavier cringes slightly at that. That's a good point, I guess. Though it still hurts to have to describe it in that past tense now. I gave a sigh, empathizing with the poor boy. I'm not sure that's something that will ever get easier. A small smile formed on Xavier's muzzle. Doesn't mean we can't get back there one day. It's as if the world had been given a second chance. Society has a fresh start to build something new. Things may be difficult right now, but there's always a brighter dawn when the night ends. It's our job to make sure that we part the clouds that block the way so that we really get a chance to shine. My heart warmed a little at his words, knowing that despite what he learned today, we could still hold on to that sense of optimism. I felt myself growing, that same smile he was wearing, his positivity almost infectious. And positivity was something that I could use more of in my strange new life. I bumped my shoulder against his, widening my smile. Careful now, Xavier. Keep talking like that and I might mistake you for a hippie. We both let out a chuckle at that joke, feeling some of that good vibes starting to return. Speaking of night, mind if I ask some more questions, Dorian? I nodded, sensing where the conversation was headed. Hit me with them, kid. He rolled his eyes at being called a kid once more, but continued. What exactly is the deal with the whole daylight cycle? It seemed to be twilight for an awful long time earlier and feels too early to be night. I mean, we barely even got any proper sunshine. I took a moment to ponder his question, thinking of the best information that I could provide him that wouldn't ruin the ongoing mood. There's not really a clear answer to that since we don't have access to the proper tech to figure it out. However, everyone has their own theories. The crazier ones often say that it was the work of the Coven of Witches finally enacting a centuries-long curse, or that the government shrank the sun. The more believable theories state that something caused the Earth to shift and knocked it off its axis. The new rotation causes us to spend most of the time in the state of twilight. He seemed to contemplate that for a moment before nodding, as if he had decided on something. I think the witch's theory is more fun, so I'll go along with that. I gave him a small chuckle of approval to his response. A silence came over us, with Xavier looking at his feet before making eye contact once more, his smile now twitching slightly. There was a different kind of nervousness to his features now, not one scared of the world, but something more personal. I do have one more question, though, something that I've been wondering since you mentioned it earlier. Hit me with it. Who's Marshall? My breath immediately caught in my throat. I guess I let that name slip when explaining things. Each time I thought about him, how he wasn't here next to me, my heart skipped a beat. I felt his hand rest on my shoulder and squeeze in reassurance. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, it's up to you. I appreciate the support. I don't mind telling you, though. It's better to talk about things than let them simmer. I take a deep breath before starting. Marshall is my boyfriend. I last saw him the morning of the apocalypse, but there's been no sign of him since. He's out there, though. I know he is. If he weren't, I'd feel it. He's my everything, and I'll do whatever it takes to find him again, no matter the price. Xavier gave me a grin, pulling me into a side hug. I have faith that you'll find him too. We spent the remainder of the night in silence, the two of us just reveling in each other's company. Xavier shared some of his rations with me, not acknowledging my protests that I had enough for myself. We'd only been together for a few hours today, and yet there was a sort of pull from him, one that made me feel safe. That I could open up to him about anything. That I could trust him. And trust is a scarce resource nowadays. I stood up, stretching my back as the fire began to die down. All right, kid, we should get some rest now. We've got a big few days ahead of us. Xavier shot me a confused look at that. What do you mean? What's happening? Taking the emblem out of my pocket, I tossed it in his direction, where he snatched it out of the air. He opened his palms, looking the symbol over. What is it? It's a symbol of a community that has established itself in the ruins of our world, a place where people are safe within its walls. They call themselves Haven. And tomorrow we depart. It's time to pay Haven a visit. Dear Marshall, I can't believe I ever gave up the joys that come from hiking. It's been so long since I last took one through the woods outside of town, I'd briefly forgotten what it was like. The soft chirping of birds in the trees, while the other wild animals like squirrels and chipmunks hop between branches. The gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the treetops above, as well as cooling down my cheeks from the exercise. The rays of sunlight illuminating my surroundings as I walked, causing the fauna to blossom and truly shine. Can you tell yet that I've been working on my writing? To get to the point, I never realized how much I miss spending time on these trails. After the way things ended before you, I thought I'd never find that sense of joy again in these things I used to love. But you taught me that I shouldn't let the past hold such an iron grip over my future. It'll take time to heal, but I know that I'll get there with you one day. I'm sure the future will hold many difficulties for us, Marshall. With you at my side, though, I could take on the world. For now, I'll just need to take on the trek back to the car. I hiked so far today and found this beautiful look out over the city. You'd love it. Maybe next time I could bring you with me with a basket of food, and we could have our own little picnic. We can create new experiences to override the pains of the past. to bring a newfound joy back to my old interests. I look forward to all the wonderful memories we'll make together, my love. See you soon, Marshy. Love, Dorian. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today. So, it went from nice little couple to apocalypse. And I checked, and there isn't any real difference in how you handle the first faded that you come across in the story. Because even if you go inspect the corpse, basically, or you ignore it, the faded will present itself, because as what was his name over again? Because as Dorian pointed it out, it was basically looking for a meal. It knew somebody was there, and it was just waiting for somebody to pop up, and eventually it would probably go after Dorian if he didn't show, poke out his head at least. But luckily, Xavier was nearby and he helped. Now, the question is, do you believe the story that Xavier told? Do you believe that he was actually stuck in a bunker and he literally just got out 3 days ago and he, stumbled across this person? Because he could just be another survivor that's like, oh yeah, I was, stuck. Yeah. That also brings to mind that perhaps his parents, who, basically built a bunker to protect their family, parents and their son, probably were like, oh no, we can't get into the bunker, and it seems that the faded arise from people that lose hope, that lose like all hope. So I'm wondering if maybe the parents turned into faded. That would be like a twist. But I'm pretty sure that if they had, that Xavier might have already seen them, encountered them, but apparently he didn't. And I'm curious about this Haven place, because they were playing by the Walking Dead rules. There's always like little communities, but there's always something off about them, when the protagonists first meet them, before they become actually safe havens. But they might just also be, safe havens. We don't know yet. Anywho, I'm assuming the thing that you're seeing in the background right now is the city, or at least what's left of it. So yeah. I'm also curious if Marshall is still alive. I would be sad if he isn't, and it would be even sadder if he was a faded. And I'm saying this without actually having read the next two, sections. I say next two sections because there's like around 3,000 words written right now for this update, because I checked. And I knew where to pause, to split up the video. And there's at least from here to there, and there's a sad part coming, I know it, because I read from the comments. So perhaps they do make it to the city, or something happens that it gets even sadder than it is now. Anyways, so yeah, what are your thoughts? Are you gonna, read the last night to figure out what's going on, because you're not gonna be patient enough to wait until the next part of the video shows up? Have you already read it? If you have, shut your mouth until the last video, please. Don't say, oh, it gets sad. Yeah, it's a sad story. No, wait. If the only thing you have to write is that it's sad, wait until the last video. Wait until Friday, because this will probably come out. If nothing pops up on Sunday, because I'm recording this on Saturday, then, this will show up on Monday, then the next video will be Wednesday, and then the last one will be Friday. So if you already know what happens, resist the comment of saying, oh, it's sad. I already read it. It's sad. It ends sad. Okay. Because I'm pretty sure there's going to be somebody that's going to say that. So resist the impulse to write how, the newest update is. Okay? Okay? Anyways, so yeah. Anybody else who has theories about what's going to come up next, write it down in the comments. And thank you all for watching / listening. If you would like to play One Last Night yourself, you can find it over on itch. And you can find a direct link to it from the One Last Night Twitter page, which I will post down in the description. And if they have any sort of, coffee or Patreon or something where you can donate, to the project if you like it, I will post down a link to it down in the description. If it's a Patreon, that usually means that you'll get early access. If not, then oh well. And I guess that's it for now, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.